They left her hanging between two trees until the cowboy rode in and said, "Touch her again and die." She lived on the outskirts, near the edge of a wide, open plain where the wind seemed to carry whispers from one end of the fields to the other. Her family ran a modest farm, growing vegetables and raising a few chickens and cows. Life was simple, and Clara found joy in small things: the laughter of children, the sound of birds in the morning, and the quiet hours she could spend reading under the shade of the old oak tree behind her house. One summer, the town seemed quieter than usual. The heat pressed down on the dusty streets, and the sun burned the earth so fiercely that even the strongest plants bowed under its weight. Clara was used to long days outdoors, helping her parents with the farm chores, but that day had been different. She had walked to the far side of the woods near the river to gather water, a chore she had done hundreds of times before. The forest was thick in some places, with branches tangled together and sunlight barely reaching the ground. Birds called to one another, and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind created a calm rhythm that usually comforted her. But this day, the forest held a different kind of sound, one that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. She wasn't alone. From between the trees, figures emerged, men she had seen in town before but never thought would bother anyone. They had a reputation, a kind of fear that people whispered about but tried not to speak of openly. They were rough, cruel men who believed they could do whatever they wanted, and they had taken a sudden interest in Clara. Before she could react, the men surrounded her. Panic rose in her chest like a bird trapped in a cage. She tried to pull away, but one of them grabbed her arm, holding her tight. Another man appeared behind her, quickly tying her hands to the rope they had brought. Her heart pounded in her chest as they dragged her to a clearing where two trees stood a few feet apart. They tied her there, leaving her hanging between them, the ropes biting into her skin. Clara's mind raced. She felt fear clawing at her, and for the first time she realized just how vulnerable she was in this world. Her voice trembled as she pleaded, but the men only laughed, calling out cruel words she couldn't believe were meant for her. She thought of her parents, of the small farmhouse where she had spent countless happy days. She thought of her friends and neighbors, but all of them seemed too far away, too afraid to intervene. The forest, which usually felt like a safe place, now seemed like a trap closing in on her. The sun above felt too hot, the shadows too deep. Time stretched in that clearing. Each minute felt longer than the last. Each sound of leaves rustling or a branch snapping made her heart leap. She tried to reason with them, to appeal to any sense of decency they might have, but they ignored her, taking pleasure in her fear. Clara's mind wandered to thoughts of escape. She tested the ropes with all her strength, trying to see if she could loosen them, but they were tightly bound. She realized she couldn't free herself, not without help. As she hung there, dangling between the two trees, Clara's eyes scanned the surroundings desperately. Maybe someone would come. Maybe someone would see what was happening and intervene. The thought gave her a small glimmer of hope, but it was fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind. She felt the sun beating down on her shoulders and back, sweat running down her face, mixing with tears that she could not hold back. Fear and shame intertwined in her heart, but underneath it all, a spark of resilience remained. Clara had faced difficulties before, small and large, and she knew she could endure this too, if only someone would come to help. Meanwhile, in the quiet town nearby, people went about their daily routines, unaware or unwilling to face the threat looming just beyond the tree line. The men's presence in the forest was not a secret, but fear had silenced the townspeople. Clara's situation was precarious, and the sense of isolation added to her terror. Every noise, the snapping of a twig, the distant call of a bird, the rustling of leaves, made her heart race. She was trapped, but she refused to give up completely. Her mind, sharp and alert even in fear, searched for any opportunity to survive. Hours seemed to pass. The men grew bored, leaving Clara suspended between the trees, taunting her with words that cut deeper than any physical harm. The forest seemed to close in on her, the shadows lengthening as the sun moved across the sky. Clara's muscles ached from the strain of being tied, and her throat hurt from crying out, but still, she held onto the hope that help could come. She remembered the stories her mother had told her about courage and resilience, about standing strong even when the odds seemed impossible. That thought gave her a strange comfort. As the sun began to lower, casting long golden rays through the trees, Clara heard something unexpected, the distant sound of hooves hitting the dry earth. Her heart leapt. She wasn't sure if it was real or just wishful thinking, but the rhythm of the approaching hooves was steady, strong, and deliberate. Someone was coming, and her hope surged. She strained her eyes, searching for a figure through the trees, and then she saw him, a man on horseback, moving swiftly but with calm precision. His presence was striking, almost like a guardian stepping into a scene that had seemed hopeless. The man dismounted with ease, his horse obedient at his side. He was a cowboy, someone who clearly knew the land and how to handle dangerous situations. His eyes scanned the clearing, taking in the men who had left Clara hanging, and the fear that Clara had felt began to mingle with a sense of relief. He didn't hesitate. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but carried a weight that made the men pause. "Touch her again and die," he said. The words were simple, but there was no doubt about their seriousness. The men hesitated, taken aback by his calm but firm presence. Clara's hope flared even brighter. She had felt powerless moments before, but now, with the cowboy standing between her and danger, a sense of possibility returned. Perhaps she could be free after all. The fear in her chest was still there, but it was tempered by a glimmer of courage, the courage to survive, the courage to believe that someone else could act when she could not. The cowboy's presence brought more than just hope, it brought clarity. He showed that courage could arrive unexpectedly, and that sometimes the ordinary people of a town could not act alone, but help could come from places they did not expect. Clara hung there, still tied between the trees, but now she felt that she was not completely alone. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time that day, Clara allowed herself a small, quiet hope. Even as the tension filled the clearing, Clara's mind began to plan. If she was freed, she would run back to safety, but she also knew the experience would change her. She had faced fear in its purest form, and though she had been powerless before, the arrival of the cowboy had reminded her that strength could come from others, and courage could be found in the most unexpected ways. The scene was far from over, and danger still lingered in the air, but the shift had happened. Clara's story was entering a new chapter, a chapter where she would no longer be completely at the mercy of those who sought to harm her. With the cowboy standing resolute, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she would survive this ordeal, and when she did, she would carry the lessons of this terrifying day with her forever. The forest, once a place of fear, began to feel different. The wind through the leaves seemed to whisper a promise that courage, once awakened, could change everything. Clara's hands ached from the ropes, her shoulders burned from being suspended, but in her heart a seed of hope had been planted. She would endure. She would survive. And in that moment, she realized that bravery could sometimes come in the form of someone arriving at just the right time, someone who refused to ignore injustice, someone like the cowboy who had ridden into her life and would not let harm come to her. The cowboy's presence changed everything in the clearing. Luke, as he was known in the surrounding towns, had a reputation that carried far beyond the boundaries of the plains. He was a quiet man, one who rarely sought attention, but when injustice crossed his path, he did not hesitate to act. His horse shifted slightly beneath him, sensing the tension in the air, and his eyes never left the men who had dared to threaten Clara. The gang had expected to scare her, to humiliate her, and to walk away without consequence. They had not anticipated an outsider arriving at precisely the moment they thought they were in control. Their laughter faded as they recognized the resolve in Luke's stance. He did not brandish a weapon, yet his calm authority carried a weight heavier than any gun. The words he had spoken, "Touch her again and die," echoed in the clearing, chilling the men more than any bullet could have. Clara, still suspended between the two trees, felt a mixture of fear and relief. She could hardly believe that someone had arrived in time, that she might be saved. Her body ached, her hands and wrists raw from the ropes, but a spark of hope ignited within her. She watched Luke carefully, noting the way he moved, the way he held himself, and the way his eyes never wavered from the men. There was a strength about him, not just physical, but something deeper, a strength of will and character that immediately commanded respect. The gang muttered among themselves, trying to regain their composure. One of the men stepped forward, a smirk playing on his lips as if to challenge Luke. "And who are you supposed to be?" he sneered. "Another fool trying to play hero." Luke's expression did not change. He took a slow step forward, his voice steady and calm. "I'm just a man who doesn't like seeing wrong done to someone who can't defend herself. You leave her alone, or you'll regret it." The words were simple, but they carried an unmistakable warning. The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had been bullies for years, but they were not used to meeting someone who could match their confidence with quiet authority. Luke didn't shout or threaten with violence unnecessarily. His presence alone made them reconsider. The tension was thick, almost tangible, like the heat of the sun pressing down on the clearing. Clara felt her heart begin to steady, even though her body still trembled from fear. She realized that Luke's arrival had shifted the balance of power. The men who had tormented her no longer seemed invincible. They were unsure, hesitant, and fearful of what might happen if they defied him. Clara clung to this feeling, drawing strength from the knowledge that she was not entirely alone. Luke slowly approached the ropes, his eyes never leaving the gang. "You've made a mistake today," he said, his voice low but firm. "You chose to harm someone who didn't deserve it, and now you're going to leave, quietly and without further trouble. Understand." For a moment there was silence. The forest seemed to hold its breath. The men had not expected to be confronted with such unwavering courage. Their confidence, which had seemed unshakable just moments before, wavered. They looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. The youngest among them shifted nervously, while the leader clenched his jaw, trying to maintain a sense of control. Luke did not flinch. He stood his ground, every inch the embodiment of someone who would act if forced, but who hoped that violence could be avoided. "I won't ask again," he said. "Leave her now." The leader of the gang spat on the ground, but his eyes betrayed his hesitation. He realized that Luke was not bluffing. There was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, a sense of purpose that suggested he would not back down, no matter the cost. Finally, after a tense moment that seemed to stretch on forever, the gang muttered curses under their breath and began to retreat. Clara's heart pounded as she watched them disappear into the woods, their shadows blending with the trees. Relief washed over her like a cool breeze. She was safe for now. Luke moved to the trees where Clara was tied. His hands were careful and precise as he untied the ropes, making sure not to hurt her further. Clara rubbed her wrists, feeling the sting of the rough rope, but she smiled weakly through her tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Luke nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe now," he said. "That's all that matters." Clara slowly stepped down from the ropes, her legs unsteady but her spirit beginning to recover. She took a deep breath, the first one that didn't feel weighted by fear. The forest, which had seemed so threatening just moments before, now felt less intimidating, though the memory of the terror lingered in her mind. She knew that the experience would stay with her forever, shaping the way she saw the world, but she also knew that courage could appear in the most unexpected forms. The journey back toward the town was quiet at first. Clara stayed close to Luke, feeling safer with each step. The forest still held shadows and every sound made her heart jump, but the sense of hope remained. Luke walked beside her, keeping a careful eye on the path and the surrounding area. He spoke occasionally, offering quiet words of reassurance. "The forest can be tricky," he said. "It's full of places people can hide, but courage and calm thinking go a long way." Clara listened, absorbing the calmness in his voice. She realized that part of the courage she felt now was not just from being freed, but from the example Luke had set. He had confronted danger without panic, without unnecessary force, and had protected her simply by standing firm and acting when needed. It was a lesson she would carry with her always. As they neared the edge of the woods, Clara could see the outlines of the small town ahead. The houses were modest, the streets dusty, and the people going about their evening routines. It was a place she knew well, but seeing it now from the perspective of someone who had faced true danger made it seem both familiar and fragile. She realized how easily fear could take hold when no one intervened, and how vital it was to act when someone needed help. Luke helped her across a shallow stream, careful to keep her balanced. "Almost there," he said. "You'll be back with your family soon." Clara's eyes filled with tears, not only from relief but from the overwhelming gratitude she felt. She had been terrified moments ago, and now she was walking toward safety, guided by a stranger who had risked everything to protect her. When they reached the edge of town, a few townspeople had gathered, curious about the sounds of commotion and the appearance of a stranger with a young woman. Some looked surprised, others relieved, and a few even impressed. Clara recognized neighbors and friends, people who had been too afraid to act but now witnessed the aftermath of courage in action. She felt a quiet pride, mixed with gratitude, knowing that one person's bravery had made a difference. Luke stayed with her until she was safely reunited with her family. Her parents rushed forward, embracing her with tears and trembling hands. "We thought we lost you," her mother whispered, holding her tightly. Clara looked at Luke, wanting to express the depth of her gratitude, but he only nodded and said, "She's safe. That's what matters." Before leaving, Luke offered one final piece of advice. "Fear is powerful, but courage can be stronger. Remember that. And remember to look out for one another. It's the small acts of bravery, even when no one else notices, that make all the difference." With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the fading light of the evening. Clara watched him go, realizing that sometimes heroes appear quietly, do what is necessary, and leave without expecting recognition. As the sun set over the town, Clara reflected on what had happened. She had experienced fear like she never had before, felt helpless, and yet had learned a profound lesson about courage, protection, and the human capacity to act when someone is in danger. The memory of being tied between two trees would stay with her, but so would the memory of the calm, steady presence of the cowboy who had saved her. That night, as she lay in bed surrounded by the safety of her home, Clara thought about the people who had walked by without helping, and about the one who had stopped. She realized that life was fragile, and that courage, when shown, could ripple far beyond a single moment. The story of today would stay with her forever, a reminder that help could arrive in the most unexpected ways, and that bravery was not always loud. It was sometimes quiet, steady, and unshakable. After the terrifying ordeal in the woods, Clara felt a strange mixture of relief and lingering fear. Even though she was safely back home, the images of the men and the ropes that had held her still haunted her mind. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind through the trees, reminded her of how close she had come to danger. She could not sleep easily, and at times she found herself replaying every moment in the clearing, wondering what might have happened if the cowboy had not arrived. Her parents, though grateful for her safe return, were also shaken. Her mother, a gentle woman with a quiet strength, fussed over her endlessly, checking her hands, her wrists, her back, making sure there were no lasting injuries. Her father, usually calm and steady, paced the house late into the night, thinking about what could have happened and how he might have prevented it. Both of them were deeply thankful to the cowboy, though they had only glimpsed him briefly before he rode away. Clara's friends and neighbors came by over the next few days, offering comfort and support. Some were curious, asking questions about what had happened, while others were more reserved, unsure how to approach such a frightening event. Clara appreciated their concern, though she often felt overwhelmed by attention. She had never imagined that one terrifying afternoon could ripple so widely through her small town. The fear she had felt was personal and intense, but the effect it had on everyone around her reminded her that danger and courage are never isolated. They touch everyone nearby. Though her physical injuries were minor, a few bruises on her wrists and arms, Clara carried emotional scars that were far harder to soothe. At first, she struggled to leave the house. Every walk to the well, every errand near the edge of the woods, brought a wave of anxiety. She felt the weight of her vulnerability and the memory of the ropes that had held her so tightly. But she also remembered the cowboy's calm, firm voice, and the way he had stood between her and danger. His courage became a model for her own, a quiet inspiration that began to guide her steps. In the days following the event, Clara began to rebuild her routine. She returned to helping on the farm, tending to the animals and caring for the garden. Each small task, simple as it was, helped restore a sense of normalcy. She realized that part of her recovery involved reclaiming the spaces that had once felt safe but had been invaded by fear. The woods near the river, which had once been a place of danger, slowly became familiar again, though she approached them with caution. Clara knew that being brave did not mean forgetting fear. It meant acting in spite of it. During this time, Clara also began to notice how the community reacted. Some neighbors had always seemed distant, but after hearing about her ordeal, they began to show subtle signs of change. They greeted her more warmly, offered to help with chores, or simply asked how she was doing. Clara felt a renewed sense of connection with her town. She realized that bravery and compassion were contagious. When one person acted courageously, it inspired others to act with kindness and awareness. The cowboy's intervention had not only saved her, it had reminded everyone in the town of the importance of looking out for one another. One afternoon, Clara walked along the edge of the woods with her younger brother, Michael. He had been worried about her constantly, asking questions that showed both concern and curiosity. "Do you think he will come back?" Michael asked, his small face serious. Clara smiled gently at him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but we learned that there are people in the world who do the right thing, even when it's hard. That's what matters." Clara's reflections were not just about courage. She also thought about resilience. She had been terrified and helpless, but she had endured. Her strength had not come from bravado or aggression. It had come from the will to survive, the belief that help could arrive, and the quiet determination to hold on until it did. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to feel a sense of empowerment she had never known before. She understood that fear would always exist, but fear did not have to control her. School and social life gradually returned to normal, but Clara carried a deeper awareness of her surroundings. She noticed the way the townspeople moved through the streets, how the children played in the dusty lanes, and how the adults talked quietly about their own lives. Every small observation reminded her of the delicate balance between safety and danger, and the importance of standing firm in the face of injustice. She also began to share her experience with close friends, not to frighten them, but to help them understand the value of courage and support. At the same time, Clara's mind often wandered back to the cowboy. She had only seen him for a brief time, but the memory of his calm authority lingered like a guiding light. Who was he? Where did he come from? Why had he chosen to intervene? These questions fascinated her, but she realized that the answers mattered less than the lesson he had imparted, that one person could make a difference when others were unwilling or afraid to act. The cowboy had shown her that bravery could be quiet, deliberate, and effective without being violent. The gang that had terrorized her was never seen in the immediate aftermath, and Clara hoped they had learned a lesson too. She did not wish harm upon them. She had no desire for revenge, but she understood that courage and integrity often create consequences naturally. People who act with cruelty rarely continue unchecked when confronted by someone willing to stand up for what is right. She hoped the memory of that day would stay with the town as a warning, reminding everyone of the importance of justice and empathy. As Clara regained her confidence, she began to venture further into the woods once more. At first, her steps were hesitant, her eyes constantly scanning the trees for shadows. But gradually, she discovered that the woods were not her enemy. They were simply a part of life that required respect and awareness. She learned to move with intention, to trust her instincts, and to appreciate the quiet beauty that had once seemed overshadowed by fear. Birds sang from the branches, sunlight filtered through the leaves in golden beams, and the air carried the gentle scent of wildflowers. Slowly, she reclaimed the forest as a place of peace rather than terror. Through these experiences, Clara began to notice changes in herself. She was more observant, more empathetic, and more willing to speak up when she saw wrongdoing. The ordeal had shown her the fragility of safety and the importance of courage in daily life. She realized that strength was not measured by how much fear one could avoid, but by how one acted despite fear. This understanding influenced her interactions with others. She offered comfort to friends who were struggling, helped neighbors with small tasks, and shared her story when it could teach lessons of courage and resilience. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, Clara stood near the edge of the woods, thinking about how far she had come. The memory of being tied between two trees remained, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. Instead, she focused on the lessons she had learned, the courage she had witnessed, and the hope she had discovered. The forest was quiet, serene, and safe once more. Clara smiled softly, knowing that she was stronger than she had ever realized. The town, too, had changed in subtle ways. People became more attentive to one another, more willing to intervene in small acts of injustice, and more appreciative of courage when it appeared. Clara understood that the ripple effect of bravery extended far beyond a single moment. One person's actions, quiet, decisive, and principled, could influence an entire community. She thought about the cowboy, whose identity remained a mystery, and realized that his choice to act had not only saved her life, but had inspired an entire town to value courage and compassion more deeply. In the weeks and months that followed, Clara continued to grow in confidence. She no longer allowed fear to dictate her movements or decisions. She spent time exploring, learning new skills, and helping her family on the farm. Each day brought new challenges, but she faced them with a calm determination that had been forged in the crucible of her experience. And though she never forgot the terror she had endured, she also never forgot the strength and courage that had saved her, both from the cowboy and from within herself. The experience transformed Clara into someone who understood the delicate balance between fear and bravery. She realized that life could be unpredictable and sometimes frightening, but with courage, support, and resilience, she could face challenges she had once thought impossible. She carried the memory of that day not as a burden, but as a source of strength, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and courage could arrive when they were most needed. After weeks of careful recovery, Clara began to feel the first real hints of freedom returning to her life. The fear that had once clung to her like a shadow had started to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of confidence. She could move about the farm without the constant weight of terror pressing down on her, and she could even speak of the incident without feeling waves of panic. Slowly, she began to understand that she had survived not only because someone had helped her, but also because she had found a quiet, stubborn strength within herself. Her days became filled with purpose again. She tended the garden, fed the chickens, and helped her parents with chores, all the while reflecting on how fragile life could be and how courage often came from unexpected places. The woods, once a place of terror, became a symbol of triumph. She ventured closer to the river, her steps careful but deliberate, and she began to recognize the beauty of the forest that had almost become her prison. Sunlight filtered through the leaves in patterns that danced across the ground, and birdsong filled the air, peaceful and reassuring. She felt the first real sense of harmony with the world around her since the ordeal. Clara also began to notice changes in her community. People who had once been distant or indifferent now approached her with quiet concern and newfound respect. They asked how she was, helped with tasks around the farm, and spoke of the importance of standing up for one another. Small gestures, a neighbor offering fresh bread, another bringing eggs, or a friend accompanying her on walks, became symbols of the bond that had grown stronger after her experience. Clara realized that fear and silence often allowed cruelty to persist, but kindness and courage, however small, could ripple through a community and make a lasting difference. One morning, Clara's father suggested that she accompany him to the town's general store. It had been weeks since she had gone into town, and he felt it was time for her to regain confidence in public spaces. The streets were quiet, the late summer heat making the air heavy, but Clara held her head high. She noticed the way people looked at her, some with admiration, some with curiosity, and some with a touch of unease. She understood now that her experience had left a mark not only on her but on the entire town. Her presence reminded everyone that courage, intervention, and community mattered. At the store, Clara ran into neighbors who had once seemed distant or indifferent. They smiled warmly and offered polite greetings, which she returned. One woman, Mrs. Harlow, handed her a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For your bravery," she said softly. Clara felt her chest tighten with emotion. It was not the flowers themselves that mattered, but the recognition that her ordeal, though terrifying, had helped awaken a sense of care and solidarity among the townspeople. She realized that courage was never only personal. It inspired others to act, to care, and to look beyond fear. During these days, Clara also reflected deeply on the mysterious cowboy who had saved her. She thought about how he had arrived calmly, how he had confronted danger without hesitation, and how he had left quietly once his work was done. Though she never learned his full identity, the impact of his actions lingered in her mind. He had shown her a model of courage that was quiet yet undeniable, firm yet nonviolent, and brave without arrogance. Clara carried this lesson with her as she rebuilt her life, understanding that heroism often came in subtle forms, and that one decisive act could change the course of an entire story. Clara's evenings were now quieter and more reflective. She often sat by the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky with brilliant shades of gold and pink. She thought about the past weeks, the fear, the uncertainty, and the terror, and contrasted it with the present, which was filled with cautious peace and a sense of control over her own life. Her parents, now more attentive and protective than ever, offered gentle guidance while also encouraging her independence. They understood that Clara needed to reclaim not just her safety but her confidence, and they supported her every step of the way. As the town began to heal from the shock of what had happened, Clara realized she had a role to play in that healing. She began to speak quietly with other young women in town, sharing her experience not to frighten them but to encourage awareness and resilience. She reminded them that danger could exist anywhere, but that courage, vigilance and support from others could protect and empower them. Slowly, she became a quiet figure of inspiration, showing that surviving trauma was not only about enduring, but also about learning, growing, and helping others to find strength in difficult times. One day, Clara returned to the very spot in the woods where the ordeal had occurred. The trees stood tall, their branches swaying gently in the wind, and sunlight dappled the forest floor. She paused, taking a deep breath, and remembered the fear she had felt while suspended between those two trees. But instead of panic, she now felt gratitude and understanding. The forest that had once been a symbol of danger now represented resilience, courage, and recovery. Clara touched the rough bark of the tree where she had been tied, feeling the scars of the ropes in her memory, but also feeling a deep sense of triumph over fear. Clara's journey of healing also involved reconnecting with her friends. They welcomed her back into their circle with open arms, asking about her experiences and listening with patience and respect. Through these conversations, Clara discovered the importance of sharing stories, of speaking truth, and of supporting one another. She realized that trauma could isolate people, but communication, empathy, and understanding could rebuild trust and connection. Each day, as she spent time with friends, family, and neighbors, Clara felt stronger, more confident, and more aware of her own ability to endure and inspire. Meanwhile, Clara noticed that some men in town had quietly changed their behavior as well. Perhaps it was the memory of the mysterious cowboy, or the realization that the community now watched more closely. But bullying, harassment, and cruelty seemed less brazen than before. Clara did not take credit for this change, but she understood that courage and action, especially when visible, could influence others' behavior. Her experience had sparked a subtle shift in the town, one that encouraged justice, kindness, and careful attention to the well-being of neighbors. One afternoon, Clara was walking near the fields with her mother when she spotted a figure in the distance, a lone rider on horseback. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she thought it might be the cowboy who had saved her. But as the rider drew closer, she realized it was a stranger passing through, much like he had been. Yet seeing him brought a rush of memories, not of fear but of courage. Clara smiled to herself, understanding that the lesson the cowboy had taught her was not about him personally, but about the power of bravery, decisiveness, and moral action. The world, she realized, was full of ordinary people capable of extraordinary acts when they chose to act. Over time, Clara became increasingly confident in her own strength. She helped with farm work more efficiently, ran errands in town without hesitation, and even explored the woods with a sense of curiosity rather than fear. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it. Each day, as she faced small challenges, she reminded herself of the ordeal and of the cowboy's example. This mental framework allowed her to feel empowered, prepared, and resilient. As summer turned to autumn, Clara's story became part of the town's memory. People remembered the terror she had faced and the bravery that had intervened, not just from the cowboy but from Clara herself. She had endured, survived, and grown stronger. The small acts of courage she displayed in daily life, the attentiveness to neighbors, the care for friends, the vigilance in the woods became a model for others. Clara understood that heroism was not always about dramatic confrontations, but about consistent, thoughtful, and courageous choices that protected and uplifted others. In the evenings, Clara often thought about the future. She imagined herself facing challenges with confidence, helping others who might encounter danger, and teaching younger children in the town about courage, resilience, and empathy. The experience in the woods, terrifying as it had been, had shaped her into someone capable of strength, compassion, and leadership. She had learned that life's most important lessons often come from moments of fear, uncertainty, and challenge, and that those moments could also spark growth, understanding, and courage that lasted a lifetime. By the end of the season, Clara had fully reclaimed her life. The fear that had once dominated her existence was now a distant memory, replaced by resilience, clarity, and a deep sense of empowerment. The town, too, had grown in subtle ways, with neighbors more attentive to one another and a renewed awareness of courage and justice. Clara knew that she would never forget the ordeal, the cowboy who had intervened, or the lessons she had learned. But she also knew that she had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever challenges life might present. The months that followed the terrifying summer day were filled with change, growth, and reflection for Clara. Life in the small town had slowly returned to its gentle rhythm, yet she noticed subtle differences everywhere she looked. People moved with a little more care, spoke with a little more awareness, and treated one another with a quiet kindness that hadn't been as visible before. Clara knew, in a way she hadn't before, that courage could ripple through a community, changing hearts and actions even when no one expected it. For Clara herself, the sense of empowerment she had begun to feel in the weeks after the incident had only grown stronger. Each morning she awoke with a sense of purpose. She tended the farm carefully, making sure each task was done well, not out of fear but out of pride and responsibility. Feeding the chickens, carrying water, and tending the garden were no longer routine chores. They were acts of reclaiming her life, a daily affirmation that she could live without terror dictating her every step. With each action, she reminded herself that she had endured something extraordinary and that she could face anything with thoughtfulness, courage, and resilience. Clara also spent time reconnecting with her friends in ways she hadn't before. She joined them in games and shared stories of her recovery, carefully choosing what to say so as to teach lessons without causing fear. Her friends listened with rapt attention, drawn not just to the story itself, but to the strength and calm she now radiated. She explained that bravery wasn't about fearlessness. It was about choosing to act wisely even when fear was present. This simple truth resonated with everyone who heard it. Through her calm and honest storytelling, Clara became a quiet leader in her circle, showing others how to navigate life with courage, empathy, and strength. Her parents noticed a profound change in her as well. They watched with quiet pride as their daughter transformed from someone shaken and fearful into a young woman who walked with confidence, thought clearly, and carried herself with quiet authority. Her mother often reminded her, "You have grown so much through this, Clara. Never forget that strength is built in moments like these." Her father, usually reserved with words of praise, nodded silently and would sometimes place a hand on her shoulder, acknowledging the courage he had witnessed. Clara felt their pride deeply, yet she also realized that the most important recognition came from within herself, the knowledge that she had survived, learned, and grown stronger. One day, Clara decided to visit the very place where she had been tied between the two trees. The forest, now calm and familiar, welcomed her with rustling leaves and the soft song of birds. She walked carefully through the clearing, feeling the rough bark beneath her fingers as she touched the tree that had once been a symbol of terror. But now, instead of fear, she felt triumph and gratitude. She remembered the cowboy who had saved her, and though she had never learned his name or where he came from, she realized that the true gift he had given her was not only freedom, but a lesson in courage, decisiveness, and quiet heroism. As she stood there, Clara reflected on everything she had endured. She thought about the fear that had gripped her, the uncertainty of whether she would survive, and the helplessness she had felt. She also thought about the power of courage, the courage of the cowboy who had intervened, the courage she had found within herself to hold on, and the courage of the townspeople who began to act with care and awareness after witnessing what had happened. Clara understood that bravery was not always about dramatic acts. It could be quiet, consistent, and thoughtful, yet still transformative. Back in the town, Clara noticed that life had subtly shifted. People were more willing to look out for one another, offering small gestures of kindness and protection. Neighbors helped with chores, parents watched over their children more closely, and even the children themselves seemed to carry a stronger sense of responsibility toward each other. Clara realized that her ordeal had sparked a ripple effect that reached far beyond her own experience. It had reminded everyone that standing up against cruelty, being aware of danger, and offering support to those in need was a vital part of community life. Clara also spent time thinking about what the future might hold. She imagined herself continuing to grow in confidence, helping others, and ensuring that the lessons she had learned were not forgotten. She wanted to show others, especially young women, that courage was accessible, that strength was built through endurance and thoughtful action, and that help could come in unexpected ways. Her reflections gave her hope and a sense of responsibility. She understood that while fear might always exist, the choices people made in the face of it could shape their lives and the lives of those around them. The memory of the cowboy remained vivid in her mind. She remembered his calm, steady eyes, the quiet authority in his voice, and the deliberate way he acted without rushing or panicking. He had arrived when hope seemed dim, and in that brief moment he had changed the course of her life. Clara realized that his courage had not only saved her physically, but had also inspired her to carry forward his example, standing firm, acting decisively, and protecting those who could not protect themselves. Even though he had left without seeking recognition, his influence had become a guiding principle in her life. As the seasons changed, Clara found joy in the simple routines of life. The harvest brought its own challenges, and she met them with determination and skill. She learned to navigate both the practical and emotional aspects of running a farm, understanding that responsibility required thoughtfulness, patience, and resilience. Her confidence grew not through force or confrontation, but through careful attention, steady effort, and the willingness to face obstacles with a clear mind and calm heart. Each day was a new opportunity to apply the lessons she had learned from both fear and courage. Clara also continued to foster connections with her friends and neighbors. She shared stories of resilience, encouraged vigilance, and reminded others that courage could manifest in small acts as well as dramatic interventions. People began to speak more openly about their concerns, and the town slowly became a place where support, awareness, and bravery were valued alongside kindness and community spirit. Clara understood that her experience had not only changed her personally, but had also contributed to a larger cultural shift in her town, a shift toward empathy, protection, and moral responsibility. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of gold and orange, Clara stood on the porch of her family home, reflecting on the journey she had traveled. She thought about the fear that had once seemed overwhelming, the terror that had gripped her body and mind, and the helplessness that had consumed her. She also thought about the courage that had intervened, the cowboy's bravery, her own endurance, and the gradual awakening of empathy and awareness in her community. She realized that life's most profound lessons often came from moments of vulnerability, and that courage could emerge in many forms, quiet, deliberate, and transformative. Clara knew that the story of that summer would stay with her forever. She would never forget the fear, the tension, or the helplessness, but she would also never forget the strength, bravery, and compassion that had carried her through. The lesson was clear. Even in moments of darkness, hope and courage could arrive, sometimes unexpectedly, and with them, the power to change lives. She felt a deep sense of gratitude for her survival, for the guidance she had received, and for the opportunity to grow stronger through adversity. In the weeks that followed, Clara became more proactive in the town. She helped organize small community gatherings where people could discuss safety, courage, and the importance of watching out for one another. These gatherings were informal but meaningful, encouraging neighbors to support each other and share experiences of resilience. Clara realized that her experience, while terrifying, had given her a unique voice, one that could guide others and inspire positive change. She used it thoughtfully, gently, and with compassion, always emphasizing the importance of courage, awareness, and community support. Clara's life gradually settled into a new rhythm, one shaped not by fear but by resilience, responsibility, and awareness. She moved through each day with careful attention, meeting challenges calmly and decisively. Her relationships with family, friends, and neighbors deepened as trust and mutual care grew stronger. And while the memory of the terrifying day would always be a part of her, it no longer controlled her. Instead, it became a source of wisdom, guiding her actions and inspiring others around her. Finally, Clara understood that her story, her ordeal, her rescue, and her recovery was not just about fear or survival. It was about courage in its many forms, the bravery of the cowboy who intervened, the inner strength she had discovered, and the collective resilience of a community willing to support one another. She had endured terror, learned to navigate it, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. And in doing so, she had created a lasting impact not only on her own life, but on the town she called home. As she stood in the golden light of the evening, Clara smiled. She had survived the darkest day of her life, and in the process, she had discovered that courage, hope, and resilience could shine brighter than fear. The world would continue to challenge her, as it challenges everyone, but she was ready. She carried within her the quiet, unshakable strength of someone who had faced true danger, and emerged not broken but transformed. And with that knowledge, Clara felt a sense of peace she had never known before, the peace that comes from understanding one's own strength and the enduring power of courage.